top name. Jekyll has a huge impact on my work, and that's what I want to present about today. So this talk will be introductory level for someone who has never heard of Jekyll before, how to work with it. So some of you, for some of you it might be a bit too easy. That's why we've decided to have 4 presentations, where this one is for beginners, and then the middle ones are sort of intermediate, and the last one is kind of advanced, I think. So let's get started with an intro to Jekyll. So as the subtitle states, this is a tool that has a huge impact on the way I work, how I work. Over the past years I've been using Jekyll in many projects, and I think it's safe to say that over 80% of all my projects use Jekyll in some way or another. So what is Jekyll? It's a tool to transform your plain text into static websites and blogs. So basically you have static code like HTML, CSS. It goes through some Ruby code, programming code, and then it comes out as a website. I use Jekyll for HTML prototypes of web applications. I use it for my new company website, so I switched from WordPress to using Jekyll for my own site. The Clank website, Clank is an open source project to prototype native applications using web technology, so I use it for that too. I also use it for smaller client websites that don't get updated very often. So if it's a site that has to get updated very often, like this one, Correrio, and there's translations, there needs to be a CMS. So I use WordPress for that, but there's a lot of clients that update their site only 3 times a year. It's very custom, the way the pages are laid out, and for that Jekyll is a much better solution, because you can't really trust the client without web knowledge to lay out the pages the way they should be laid out. So for the people who are not really familiar with the terminal, because there's gonna be some command line stuff at the very front, there's an awesome screencast by Dan Benjamin. You can buy it at peepcode.com, and there's a link in the presentation here, the orange stuff that are links. And that's how I learned to work with a terminal. It's really not that hard. Who is not familiar with working with the terminal? Okay, all of you are familiar, nice. So installing Jekyll is pretty straightforward. You just use gem install Jekyll. So gem is Ruby gems. It's a system that ships with Ruby and macOS to kind of manage all the different Ruby programs on your system. If you're a Windows user, who is a Windows user here? Okay, so there is a way to install Jekyll on Windows. I'm not really sure how to do it. I've never done it, but it's possible if you Google it. There's some people who have successfully done it, like this Brian W. Weber guy. There's some dependencies. If you want to install Jekyll, it's not always super easy to set up. So I said it's gem install Jekyll, that's the command, but it's actually much more complicated than that if you have like a fresh Mac and you want to get Jekyll set up. So you might have to update your gem system, your gem updating system. You might have to install a new version of Ruby. So for this I use Ruby Version Manager, or RVM. So I can use newer versions of Ruby, but also switch to older versions of Ruby when necessary. There's also, probably you'll have to install Xcode with the command line tools. You can get Xcode from the Mac App Store. It's a free download these days, I think. And then you have to do some extra stuff within Xcode to install other command line tools. I don't know why macOS doesn't ship with that, but it is like it is. Now to update the gems and install Jekyll, I do a lot of sudo Some smart people who know more about the terminal than me tell me that it's a really bad idea, and you should use brew or homebrew to install this kind of stuff. So that's just a disclaimer for me. So if people mess up their system, I didn't do it. So let's start with generating a new Jekyll site, and it's gonna be a bit of a combination between the slides and actually doing it. So let's say you go to your desktop, so CDs, change directory to your desktop, and then you want to get a new Jekyll site up, so Jekyll new, and then you put in the title, my new awesome site, and then it will generate a new site. If you CD into that site, you'll see that there's a directory structure, config.yaml, layouts, posts, CSS, and an index file. So basically this is some sort of new site that you get if you use Jekyll new. It's the default template. I think it's one of the creators of Jekyll, his template. And if you then do Jekyll serve -w, that command will start a server at localhost :4000, and if you then use your browser to go to that website, you'll see a brand new Jekyll website. So I think it was Tom Preston Werner, or founder of GitHub, who initially made this, and this is his kind of template. So if I would go to the Finder and look at, this is probably really small, look at the folder structure, I'm going to explain the different folders. So there is config.yaml. This is a sort of plain text config file where you put configuration stuff in. I'll talk more about this later. So there is layouts, which is different layouts. I'll also talk about this in the next section. Posts is your blog post if you're planning on running a blog on Jekyll. Site is the generated site. So basically everything outside of _site is used to generate the static website that is in this folder. Then CSS is just the default CSS that ships with Jekyll. Okay. So that's what we had. The default Jekyll website. We examined the files, so I won't go through that again. So the first concept you need to understand is layouts. So let's say I open this my awesome site in my text editor, and I put a browser window next to it. It's a bit small. I want to talk about the concept of layouts first. So a layout is a file in the layouts folder. So here there is a default.html layout, and on the index page you see that there is a for loop with a list of posts. So in this case, one post, and it uses the layout default. So if I were to make a new layout for instance example.html, and then within example I would put within example I would put something else like hello, this is what needs to be in the example template. If I change this to example, this text will be rendered in every template that uses the example template. Now this example template, a common thing is that there's multiple layouts across the site, so I don't really want to have this head section here and also in default.html here. So I kind of want to put that in an include so I don't have to repeat myself. So what you would do is use include header or head.html, and then you would need a folder to put your includes in. And if you have this folder with your includes and you put the file like head.html in there, so that's what's in our head, and then we reference it from both our templates. So default and example both have head. Then our code is drier. Obviously, we don't have to change it into we don't have to change multiple values in multiple templates. So let's say you're doing front-end development, just slicing work from Photoshop, slicing up multiple pages. Using Jekyll, it's much easier to have something like HTML includes without then having to use something like PHP or Ruby to get some templating system in there, so you don't have to repeat yourself. So that's the first basic concept of Jekyll, layouts and includes. So we talked about this. A layout is basically a template in which you can inject content. I haven't talked about how you would actually inject content in a template. So if we go back to the code, you see that there's a special tag here between curly brackets that says content. So whatever is in index.html, so this gets rendered in the place of content. So if we were to abstract maybe this to a header.html and this part to a footer.html, we would have a clean template. And when we start building our site, maybe like an about page and on some other page, we would just only have this part to edit, and it will cleanly render in our layout. So that's mostly how what my layouts look like, where the head is abstracted in a head.html, the header is in a separate file, the footer is in a separate file, and in the middle is the content tag that renders the content of the file. So I talked about includes, so let's skip this because I think everyone gets it. If you have questions, just ask, or maybe after the talk because the video is running. So let's talk about YAML, front matter, and liquid. So you might have noticed the way that you put you decide which layout to render is you put it in this way. You put it with 3 dashes and then whatever you want to say and then 3 dashes. So this part of the template is called the YAML front end matter or front matter, and you use it to add some sort of metadata to a page. This will get clearer when I give you an example later on. So for example, you could add my custom statement with my value to this, and then you could render this piece of data that you added to the page in the page. This is not very useful, but what's interesting is that Liquid, the templating language from Shopify, allows you to do stuff like add if clauses to a page. So only if this statement is true, if my custom statement equals my value, so this part is the if statement, then this part of the HTML will get rendered. I'll show you how to use this in practice. For example, to show all the states of a form to a client in a slice. So let's say I'm doing the HTML for a form. So I'll just maybe put this in comments for now. And I have some form in my website, and there's an input in there. And I kind of want to show what this form will look like in all of its states. So maybe there's a label here like name, and you are required to add your name to this form. So what I will often do is put this form part in an include. So I'll have form.html, copy paste it in, and then within my template I'll include form.html. So normally if I refresh the page on the other side, nothing will happen because it's just an include now. The code is a bit cleaner, but it still works. So let's say I have extra pages, so I have index and then form error and form success. And I want to show the different states of the form. What I would do is then add some piece of metadata. So here the state is regular, but it doesn't really matter. Maybe I'll call it form state. Regular is the default, so it's kind of stupid to include it, so let's not. Form state here is success, and then in the error page, the form state is error. So if I go back to my include here, the form itself, what I could do is maybe add a success message like thanks for filling out this form, and then I'll have an error message like please enter your name. So I'm gonna be quick and dirty here. With a bit of inline styles, I wouldn't recommend doing this. So if I refresh the page now, I'll see both of these paragraphs. I don't. So let's see what's wrong. Form. Okay, here we are. So here it says both thanks for filling out this form and please enter your name. But let's use the if clause to only show the state of the page depending on our data. So what we used, let's say form success, we used form state success. So the way to transform this into an if clause is that you would call the page object with form state, page.formState equals success. And you would close the if tag with end if. And then for the error, we do something else. Page.formState error, and also close the if tag. So now our default page, if it's rendered, okay. So now our default page shows nothing. And if we go to the other pages, like formSuccess.html, we will see that the different state shows, and if we go to form error, we will see that also the error state is shown. Now, you might think, okay, that's a bit basic. How do you use it in practice? So, one of my clients, they make a ticket service, and this is not the right project. One of my clients, they make a ticketing service, and on their login page of their application alone, there are 8 or 9 different states. So it's pretty hard to communicate the states of a form to a developer through all your Photoshop mockups. So what I do in practice is I make an HTML prototype like this, where there are different states that can be called with a menu on the side, and then the different states here can be accessed by just clicking the different menu items on the left. So this is an easy way to communicate a bigger app or a bigger problem to a developer that then has to implement it in the backend language. So in this case you would be front-end developer, they would be backend, or more like the super JavaScript developer, that in this case I do the front end, and then the other guy, he puts all my stuff into something like AngularJS to make it a real working web app. So let's go back to the presentation and see where we are. So I talked about the if clause. I talked about why this is useful to render the different states of a page in like an HTML prototype. So we handled this. So this is mostly reference for those watching online. Let's talk about the for tag. So the for tag, for you programmers, this is all really obvious. But a for tag creates a loop, and it allows you to cycle through a known data set. So for example, on the home page, we have the blog posts. Let's put a form in comments for now. So on the home page, there's a for loop for the posts. But I'm gonna put my own for loop here for now. Just a really simple for loop. For num in 1.3, this will go through this cycle of values. So what it will render is A, B, and C. Now this is also pretty basic, but you might wonder how I use it in practice. So we still have this Ticketmatic running here at localhost 988. Yeah. That's where it is. So in practice, this is a prototype for a CRM application, and the data that is shown here in this table is actually rendered through a giant cycle tag. So I'm using real data that I got from the client, put it in the app. So instead of what like I used to, I would put some good-looking table in Photoshop and then call it a day. I'm now using real data from the client, like I asked them for a CSV and then did some text manipulation to get it into a cycle tag, and then it could render all these rows of data, and then I have a really good idea of how it's going to work, like how is this going to work on a smaller screen, will we need like horizontal scrolling. So I'm using the real data to have a better sense of what the actual app is gonna be. Let's go back to the presentation. So in practice it looks a bit like this, where it's really a really long line of text. It's kind of like programming for non-programmers, where I'm abusing the cycle and for tags to be able to show real data in my prototype. Let's talk a bit about blogging with Jekyll. So Jekyll contains a pre-built blogging mechanism. It's also a popular way to blog for hackers. And how it works is there is a _posts folder, and it contains Markdown files, and they have a structure which starts with a date, then a title, and then the extension. So it looks a bit like this, where there's some data, metadata on the top, and then there's the actual post content written in Markdown is in the file itself. So let's go to the example site, your new Jekyll site. Let's delete this for loop and get the default blogs listing back. And you will see that if I go to posts and then maybe copy paste this file a bunch of times, Jekyll, the renderer, which is running here, will recognize this and then render all of these. So it's a nice way to blog, I think, because it's just one file. It's much easier for me to update than going to WordPress and then struggling with the HTML in the editor. So for me, I like it to blog. I use it on the site, on the Clank site for the blog, and I also made this theme, that's this layout that's going on here. I made it public, so you can download it at wolfer.github.io, Cactus Jekyll theme. So this is kind of like the same layout, but open sourced. This is open source as well. So I'm leaning towards more blogging with Jekyll because it's just much easier. I like writing my posts in Markdown, where you can have a heading, paragraph, and all kinds of other neat stuff. So what's interesting, get to my presentation so I don't lose track. So you write them in Markdown, but if you prefer to use text style, you can also use text style for your blog posts, and you can set your Markdown parser if you want. So there's a config file, which we haven't talked about yet, config.yaml here, and here, for example, it says name is your new Jekyll site, and Markdown uses red carpet. So there's a different parsers out there for Markdown. They each have their specialty, special capabilities. I don't know, not really an expert, but what I found is that Cramdown is the best one that has the most support overall for specific tags. So this is kind of in the wrong order, but anyway, if you want to add an RSS feed to your site, it's not hard. I'll just leave this in the presentation for reference, but it's basically just adding an atom.xml file to your file structure with a loop here that loops through your posts. So it's easy to add an RSS feed to your website. Just fill out this template basically with your data. Not very hard, and I hope people keep on doing this because I like RSS and I don't want it to be dead. If you're interested in working with Jekyll and you want to learn from other people's code, there's a lot of sample sites on GitHub. So a lot of people who use their Jekyll for their website, they host that source code on GitHub. So for example, the 10-to-1 website is on GitHub. You can just look at the code, see how they do categories or pagination or more advanced things. I talked about this Jekyll, which is my responsive. Didn't tell you that. My responsive Jekyll theme, which has a pre-built blog. So Cramdown, why is this the best engine? For instance, it allows you to create nice footnotes like those on Daring Fireball or Marco.org with just a little bit of Markdown. So first you would have to specify that you want to use the Cramdown engine, because otherwise the parsing won't really work as you would expect. Intermezzo, the Jekyll site config object. So I talked about this already, but there's much more that's going to be in this object. So besides specifying that you're using Cramdown, you will probably also specify how much pages you need for your pagination. There's all kinds of stuff, but you can also do like random something, and then in your template access this with site.random. I don't know. Yellow will explain if he gets here. It's in his talk, I think. I'm not sure. That's the more advanced stuff where you actually use the site object to store data about your website. So what I really wanted to get to was the footnotes with Cramdown, where you can just use something like this to reference a footnote that is down here. So there's an extensive documentation on the Cramdown website about this, like so, where it explains all the kind of nice things you can do with their Markdown engine, like for instance inlining code, how to use links and images. I find that writing in Markdown, writing your blog post in Markdown, it's a nice and easy format that is also easier if you're like writing on the iPad. I really like Markdown, so it's a joy to be freed from the WordPress tiny MCE editor to make blog posts. Let's get back to the presentation, if I can find it. So one of the other nice things, and maybe if you've seen the source code of the Jekyll camp website, is that you can use some sort of ASCII art type stuff to make tables in HTML. It's not very handy. I wouldn't really recommend it. You can also just write HTML inside of Markdown, and this will also work. So if you want to get pagination working on your website, this is also in Jekyll. So there's some default pagination code. Now this is a bit too far to go and implement it in this example. So it's here for reference, and you can see how it's implemented in like the Cactus Jekyll theme. But basically, in a regular blog code, you would use site.posts to access the posts on your website, and then if you need pagination, you would access a pagination object because you specified in your config file that you want to paginate 7, and then probably you'll have to specify a path to the pagination. We'll get to this in a second. But since pagination is on, because you put it on in the config file, now you have to access the paginator objects to get pagination working. So your site knows that it needs to render the blog in different pages instead of just using one page to render all blog posts. Yeah, it's a bit too much to get into in detail right now. But if you're interested in Jekyll, you can use this presentation online, copy paste the code, and start working your site. That's what I was looking for. So in order to specify where your blog is, which part of your site is your blog, you need something like paginate path, where you specify that it should render blog/page num, so it will render folders like 1, 2, 3, 4 for every page. So people often wonder how to get nice permalinks with Jekyll. So there are two ways. The easy way is to do it the old school way, where you make a new folder, and then instead of blog.html, you render you put an index.html file within the folder. So your site will be like, in this case, your URL will be domain.com/portfolio, and this will work, and it's nice for small sites. But if you want to have other permalinks, there's a guide on the Jekyll site. I haven't really figured it out completely. I just use the easy method most of the time. Some parts of Jekyll are still a bit wonky to work with updates like the pagination and the permalinks. I've had mixed success with it, so I use the easy method. But maybe if I get smarter and better with Jekyll and the project also improves a bit, then I'll switch over to the way where you specify the permalinks in the YAML front matter. In the YAML front matter, so you would do something like permalink and then whatever format you're using for the permalink. So there's some built-in code for that in Jekyll, but I'm not really sure how it works. I've had issues with it. I have struggled with it for 3 or 4 hours, and then I never returned. So maybe someone else can tell me after the presentation how it really works. So one interesting problem that I always have is I have a new client and I make something for them, and then I want to put this test site online. But most of the code supposes that the test site is actually at the root URL. Let's say I have a site this site here, the one I'm making here. I need to have the right tab. So this site lives at localhost 4000, and what I want to use is some test domain that I have, like mytestdomain.com/myawesomesite. But what happens if you would upload the files is that they expect the paths, like for instance the css/screen.css, they expect it to be at a root URL. So what I do to solve this problem, where you then get a 404s, you've probably already seen this problem if you're a web developer. What I do is that I specify something called base URL in my config.yaml. So config.yaml base URL is my awesome site in this case. And then in the head section of the site, instead of referencing my files like this, I would reference them with the variable base URL. In a very long string of text. So it's a bit annoying. Every reference to every file you have to put unless site.base URL is / render the base URL. So it's kind of like the if, but in reverse, unless. And this way, if your site moves from testing, like staging, for a small site where it's on your test site, you just do base URL is / if it goes live, you re-render the site, upload it, and it's done. So I don't know if it's the ideal way to work. There's probably some better way in Jekyll. I would love to hear from you guys if there's any better way to do that. But this is my way, and it works for me. Jekyll plugins, you can make Jekyll plugins. My experience so far is that you need to know Ruby to do so, which I don't know how to write. But the Jekyll plugin is really simple. It's just a Ruby file in the plugins folder. So there's a ton of Jekyll plugins out there. You can go to the jekylrb.com site and look at the plugin list. One evening I was working with on a site, and I needed a different tag. Like instead of the cycle tag, I wanted to cycle between random items. And luckily I had a programmer next to me who wrote this in 5 minutes, cycle random. So it's basically, the way I understand this is that you would superclass liquid tag, which is some object within the Ruby system, and then what's inside is render thing. It renders some arguments. I don't know, I'm not sure. One of the goals of today was to bring the Ruby guys a bit closer to the front-end guys, because I think there's lots of interesting things that people who can program can actually do to make the lives of those who only do front-end HTML, CSS a bit easier. Just like you can create an RSS feed, you can also create a sitemap. It's very similar, where you just so like the RSS feed, you can also create a sitemap. It's also pretty easy. You just add sitemap.xml with the right tags, and you enter your I don't think you even have to enter any specific data for it. You just have to copy paste this file into the root of your directory, and you can use it to have a sitemap for Google Webmaster Tools. It will list all your posts, all your pages. So I put the link here. Some guy here, thanks David, he made this this sitemap generator. Okay, so another thing you can do that I recently found is some kind of way to capture to add Open Graph metadata to your site. So it's just an easy way to maybe boost SEO. I don't think it hurts to just put this in there, because it's mostly automatic. So basically you enter your OG locale. So put something like whatever the site is. If it's in French, put FR. If it's in Dutch, put NL. So what this does is provide some extra metadata. This should probably also be something like site.title instead of mine. But what it does is it provides some extra data to search engines, and like when people share your URL on Facebook, to have like the right pictures there, maybe the author of whoever wrote this. So it's kind of a good connection to maybe get a better search result. It takes 5 minutes to enter into a new site, so I just use it, but I don't know if it's really provides any value except for these pictures here. So that's it. Thanks for listening, and I hope that was a good intro to Jekyll.